Do you know what time it is? It's time for Kids Church. Hey, this week we're about to kick off with a song, but after that we've got the other half of the story about Moses and the people of Israel running away from Egypt, or God rescuing them from Egypt. So remember last week we had a story about how God used Moses to rescue his people from the naughty Pharaoh and slavery in Egypt. Well, this week they run into a little bit of trouble in their escape. You'll have to wait to the story to find out what happens next.
Creep, 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 in the dark fear comes to blow out all your lights. Doesn't want you telling everybody that Jesus rules all right. Let your light shine, whoa. Let your light shine, whoa. Let your light shine and let Jesus shine through you. Giant fears are really small when all you see is God. Don't be afraid to stand up tall and give a great big shout. Let your light shine, whoa. Let your light shine, whoa. Let your light shine and let Jesus shine through. 'Cause I'm not scared. I'm gonna let my light shine. And you're not scared. 'Cause you're gonna let your light shine. We're not scared. We're gonna let our light shine. 'Cause Jesus is Lord. And he's gonna let his light shine. You ready? You see it? Let your light shine. Whoa. Let your light shine, whoa. Let your light shine and let Let your light shine, whoa. Let your light shine, whoa. Let your light shine and let Jesus shine through you.
God makes a way. Moses and God's people escaped out of Egypt and into the wilderness. They didn't know the way, but God knew the way, and he would show them. I will bring you to a new home, a special land, God promised them. I will look after you. I am with you. God sent a big cloud for them to follow, a pillar of smoke stretching up into the sky. It moved in front of them as they walked and shaded them from the blazing heat of the day. And when it was time to rest, it stopped. All through the cold desert nights, it kept them warm, glowing like a fire. God led his people through the desert to the edge of a great sea. They were just wondering how to cross it when suddenly they heard a terrible thundering and pounding. It sounded almost like horses' hooves. They shaded their eyes to look back and screamed. It was! Pharaoh and his army were coming to get them. Pharaoh had changed his mind again. "Get my slaves back!" he screeched and charged out into the desert after them with 600 of his fastest horsemen and every single chariot in Egypt. What were God's people going to do? In front of them there was a big sea. It was so big there was no way round it. But there was no way through it. It was too deep. And they didn't have any boats, so they couldn't sail across, and they couldn't swim across because it was too far, and they would drown. And they couldn't turn back because Pharaoh was chasing them. They could see the flashing swords now, glinting in the baking sun, and the dust clouds, and chariot after scary chariot surging towards them. So they did the only thing that there was left to do. Panic! "We're going to die!" they shrieked. "Don't be afraid," Moses said. "But there's nothing we can do," they screamed. "God knows you can't do anything," Moses said. "God will do it for you. Trust him and watch." "But there's no way out," they cried. "God will make a way," Moses said. Another minute and it would have been over. But then the strangest thing happened. God made the pillar of smoke move. It moved behind his people and hid them from the Egyptians. Then God sent a strong east wind to blow all night long. It blew on the water of the big sea. It blew it to the left and it blew it to the right until it blew it into two towering walls of water. And there, right through the middle of the sea, a muddy pathway opened up and God's people walked across on dry land. When the Egyptians tried to follow, the walls of water crashed back down on them and swallowed them up. God's people were safe. They danced and laughed and sang and thanked God. When there had been no way out, God had made a way. Many years later, once again, God was going to make a way where there was no way. From the beginning, God's children had been running from him and hiding. God knew his children could never be happy without him, but they couldn't get back to him by themselves. They were lost. They didn't know the way back. But God knew the way, and one day he would show them.
What do you think about that story? It's a little bit scary in parts, you know. A whole lot of people trying to run away from a bunch of soldiers and get caught in front of a sea. They can't go around, they can't go under it, they can't swim through it. But God made a way. You know, it's interesting, a lot of these old stories all are kind of like a picture of what Jesus did for us. And this one's no different. So this one is definitely a picture of what Jesus did for us. You know, there was something really big that we couldn't get around separating us from God. Just like there was a big ocean separating Israel from, you know, getting to the other side, to the promised land, and getting away from Egypt. But God made a way for them to get through. And it wasn't something that they could do. They couldn't move the water apart. They couldn't get around it themselves. They had no way of getting across it. It was only something God could do for them. And that's the same with us and God. There's something, because of the things we do and some of the things we think or say, those things get between us and God. And there's nothing we can do to remove them or to push through them. But God made a way through what Jesus did to make us right with him. So we can walk on straight on through and be right with God. So when you think about the story of Moses crossing the Red Sea, very cool. It's a good story in its own right, but also is kind of like a picture of what God's done for us through Jesus. So he's made a way for us to get to him. Pretty cool. Do you know why? Because he loves you. This memory verse says, God said, I will take you as my own people and I will be your God. Exodus 6 verse 7. Now again, you could think about that as actually what God did for the people of Israel, or as well you could think about it in terms of what God does for you. He reaches out to you and takes you as his own family, and he wants to be your God. And now we've got a crazy old song that's going to help you remember the story a song that I used to sing when I was in primary school, because I know you loved the last time we did an old song for you. Here we go. Welcome to another episode of Silly Songs with Mrs. Wig.
3, 2, 1, go! Pharaoh, Pharaoh!
Ooh, baby, let my people go.
Yeah. I said, Pharaoh, Pharaoh! Ooh, baby, let my people go. Yeah. Well, a burning bush told me the other day that I should come over here and play. I've gotta get my people out of Pharaoh's hands and lead them all to the promised land.
I said a Pharaoh, Pharaoh.
Ooh, baby, let my people go.
Yeah.
I said, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Ooh, baby, let my people go. Yeah. Well, all of God's people coming to the Red Sea. Pharaoh's army coming after me. I raised my rod, stuck it in the sand, and all of God's people walked across dry land. I say,
Pharaoh, Pharaoh.
ooh, baby, let my people go.
Yeah.
I say, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Ooh, baby, let my people go.
Yeah.
Well, all of Pharaoh's army was a coming too. What do you think that I did do? I raised my rod and I cleared my throat. And all of Pharaoh's army did the dead man's flow.
Pharaoh.
Ooh, baby, let my people go.
Yeah. Pharaoh.
Oh, baby, let my people go.
What did he say?
Yeah.
He said a Pharaoh.
Ooh, baby, let my people go.
Yeah.
He said, Pharaoh. Ooh, baby, let my people go.
Okay.
Yeah.
There they go. Bye-bye.
See you later.